My name is Celeste, I'm 28 years old, and 3 years ago I bought my dream car with money I'd saved working nights and weekends at a marketing firm in Los Angeles. It was a 2018 Mustang GT in cherry red, and every time I turned that key, I felt like I could conquer the world. I'd cruise down Pacific Coast Highway with the windows down, feeling the California sun on my face and thinking about how far I'd come from that broke college kid who used to take 3 buses just to get to work. That car represented everything I'd worked for, every sacrifice I'd made, every dollar I'd earned with my own 2 hands. I never imagined that the people who were supposed to love me most would be the ones to take it all away. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear how a family betrayal turned into the most expensive lesson my parents ever learned. Trust me, you won't see this twist coming. The story of my Mustang started long before that betrayal. I remember walking into the Ford dealership on a sunny Tuesday morning in March. My bank statement showing exactly $32,400 that I'd scraped together over 3 grueling years. Every penny came from legitimate work at Henderson Marketing Solutions, where I'd climbed from intern to junior account manager through pure determination. I worked double shifts during holiday seasons, took on weekend projects that nobody else wanted, and lived in a studio apartment that was basically a closet with a window just so I could save every dollar possible. The salesman, a middle-aged guy named Chuck with a genuine smile, walked me around that beautiful machine. The paint job gleamed like liquid fire under the showroom lights, and when he popped the hood to show me that 5.0-liter V8 engine, I knew this was it. This wasn't just transportation. This was freedom, independence, and proof that a girl from a working-class family in Riverside could make her dreams come true through hard work alone. My family situation made that achievement even more meaningful. My parents, Margaret and Robert, had always struggled financially, working blue-collar jobs that kept us comfortable but never ahead. They were good people with big hearts, but they had one major blind spot. My younger brother Tyler. At 24, Tyler had never held a job for more than 6 months, dropped out of community college twice, and still lived in his childhood bedroom at my parents' house. While I was grinding through 60-hour work weeks to afford my car, Tyler was sleeping until noon and playing video games until 3 in the morning. The dynamic in our family had always been clear. I was the responsible one who took care of herself, and Tyler was the baby who needed protection and support. My parents justified this by saying he was still finding his way, and that I was naturally more independent. What they really meant was that I'd proven I could survive on my own, so they could focus all their emotional and financial resources on Tyler without feeling guilty. When I first brought the Mustang home to show them, the reactions were exactly what I expected. Mom gasped and said it was beautiful but worried about the insurance costs. Dad nodded approvingly and asked about the engine specs. But Tyler's reaction stuck with me. He circled that car like a predator sizing up prey, running his hands along the curves and asking how fast it could go. When he casually mentioned that I should let him take it for a spin sometime, I politely declined, explaining that I wasn't comfortable letting anyone else drive my brand new car. That refusal created the first crack in our family dynamics. Tyler couldn't understand why his own sister wouldn't share something so simple with him, and my parents began their subtle campaign of making me feel selfish for setting that boundary. They'd make comments like family should share with family, and remember when Tyler let you borrow his bicycle when we were kids? As if a rusted 10-speed from Walmart was equivalent to a $30,000 sports car that represented years of my life's work. The pressure intensified when I decided to move out of my cramped studio and into a decent 1-bedroom apartment in Manhattan Beach. My parents saw this as further evidence that I was getting too big for my britches and pulling away from family values. They couldn't understand that I wanted space to enjoy the fruits of my labor without constant guilt trips about not doing enough for Tyler. The distance helped initially, but it also made me an easier target for what was coming next. The first real incident happened on a Thursday night in September, 6 months after I'd bought the car. I was settling in to watch a movie after a particularly brutal day dealing with a difficult client, when my phone rang at exactly 2:17 in the morning. Tyler's name flashed on the screen, and my heart immediately started racing because late-night calls in our family usually meant someone was in the hospital or worse. "Celeste, thank God you answered." Tyler's voice was panicked and breathless. "I'm stranded downtown and my car just died completely. The engine made this horrible grinding noise, and now it won't even turn over. I have that huge job interview at Morrison Construction tomorrow morning at 8, and this could be my big break." I know you don't usually let people drive the Mustang, but I'm literally desperate here. I'll have it back to you by noon tomorrow. I swear on Mom's life." The whole situation felt wrong from the start, but Tyler sounded genuinely distressed, and I knew how much my parents wanted him to finally land a steady job. Morrison Construction was a big company in Orange County, and if he could get his foot in the door there, maybe he'd finally start taking responsibility for his life. Against every instinct screaming in my head, I agreed to meet him at a 24-hour diner near downtown to hand over the keys. When I arrived at the diner, Tyler was pacing in the parking lot, still wearing the same clothes I'd seen him in 3 days earlier. His story about the car breakdown was vague and inconsistent. He claimed it happened outside a club, but when I asked which club, he got defensive and said it didn't matter. He promised again that he'd have my car back by noon, and that he understood how much it meant to me. Handing over those keys felt like giving away a piece of my soul, but I told myself this was what family did for each other. Tyler drove off into the night, and I spent the entire Uber ride home second-guessing my decision. The driver, a friendly older gentleman named Hassan, noticed my anxiety and asked if everything was okay. When I explained that I'd just lent my new car to my brother for a job interview, he shook his head and said something that would haunt me. "Family is supposed to protect what you've worked for, not put it at risk." The next day at work was torture. I couldn't concentrate on anything because I kept imagining worst-case scenarios. What if Tyler crashed my car? What if he decided to show off and got pulled over for reckless driving? What if his idea of taking care of my Mustang was different from mine? Every hour that passed felt like an eternity, and I found myself checking my phone constantly for updates that never came. Noon arrived and passed without a word from Tyler. 1 o'clock became 2 o'clock, which became 3 o'clock. My calls went straight to voicemail, and my text messages showed as delivered but never read. By 4:30, I was in full panic mode and called my mom to see if she'd heard from him. "Oh honey, Tyler mentioned the interview ran long and they wanted him to meet with several different managers," Mom said casually. "You know how these big companies are with their hiring processes. I'm sure he'll call you soon." But 6 o'clock came and went, then 7, then 8. When Tyler finally answered his phone at 9:15, his casual attitude made my blood boil. "Hey Celeste, sorry I didn't call earlier." The interview went amazing, and then I met up with some of the guys who might be my new co-workers. We grabbed some drinks to celebrate, and I completely lost track of time. "I'll definitely get the car back to you first thing tomorrow morning." Tomorrow morning, I could barely control my voice. "Tyler, you said noon today. I had to take an Uber home from work that cost me $45 because I was counting on having my car back. Come on, don't be so uptight about it. It's not like I'm selling it or anything. One extra night isn't going to kill you." That conversation ended with me hanging up on him, something I'd never done before in my life. I spent that night lying awake wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life by trusting him with the most valuable thing I owned. What I thought would be one extra night turned into the longest week of my life. Tyler's excuses became more elaborate and less believable with each passing day. First it was additional interviews, then it was training sessions for his new job. By the third day, he claimed he was house-sitting for one of his new colleagues, and couldn't leave the car unattended in an unfamiliar neighborhood. Each excuse came with promises that tomorrow would definitely be the day he returned my Mustang, and each broken promise chipped away at my trust and sanity. I was spending nearly $200 a week on rideshare services just to get to and from work, money I couldn't afford to waste from my carefully managed budget. Worse than the financial strain was the emotional toll of realizing that my own brother was lying to me with the same ease that most people say good morning. On Saturday of that hellish week, I'd finally had enough. I took an Uber to my parents' house, determined to end this nonsense once and for all. When I arrived, I could see my cherry red Mustang parked in their driveway like it belonged there, which immediately sent my blood pressure through the roof. But what I discovered next made me question everything I thought I knew about my family. Tyler wasn't using my car for job interviews or professional networking. Through the living room window, I could see him lounging on the couch with his girlfriend Amber, a 19-year-old who worked part-time at a nail salon, and spent most of her energy posting selfies on social media. Empty beer bottles covered the coffee table, and Tyler was bragging loudly about his new ride to some friends who'd apparently come over to see it. When I walked through the front door using my old key, the room went silent. Tyler looked up from the couch with the expression of a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar, but instead of apologizing, he immediately went on the offensive. "Celeste, what are you doing here? You can't just barge into Mom and Dad's house without calling first. I'm here for my car keys, Tyler. Right now. Relax, I was just showing it off to some friends. You act like I'm going to wreck it or something. You've had my car for 6 days when you promised 1 day. You've been lying to me about job interviews and training sessions. And now I find out you're using it to impress your girlfriend and friends? My parents chose that moment to walk in from the kitchen, and instead of supporting me, they immediately began defending Tyler's behavior. Dad said I was making a mountain out of a molehill, and that brothers and sisters should be able to count on each other. Mom added that Tyler had been so responsible with the car, and that I should be proud of how mature he was being. The gaslighting was so complete and shameless that I almost wondered if I was losing my mind. Here was Tyler, clearly using my car for personal entertainment after lying to me for nearly a week, and my parents were acting like I was the unreasonable one for being upset about it. "It's just a car, Celeste," Mom said with that tone she'd perfected over years of making me feel guilty for having boundaries. Family should help each other out, and Tyler really needed this boost to his confidence after struggling to find work. "This isn't about helping family," I shot back. "This is about respecting someone else's property and keeping your word. Tyler lied to me repeatedly, and you're enabling him." The argument that followed was unlike anything we'd ever had as a family. Tyler accused me of being selfish and materialistic. My parents said I'd changed since buying the car and moving out, becoming too good for my own family. The more they attacked my character, the more I realized that this wasn't really about a car at all. This was about power, control, and the family dynamic that had always placed Tyler's wants above my needs. Finally, Tyler tossed my keys on the coffee table with theatrical disgust and said, "Fine, take your precious car, but don't expect me to ask you for help with anything ever again." As I picked up those keys, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There was a small but unmistakable scratch along the driver's side door, and when I got inside, the interior reeked of cigarette smoke, despite the fact that I'd never allowed smoking in my car. Tyler had not only lied to me and used my car for entertainment, but he'd also damaged it and filled it with smoke that would take weeks to fully air out. When I confronted him about the damage, he shrugged and said, "It's not like I crashed it or anything. You're being way too dramatic about a tiny scratch that probably costs $50 to fix." I left my parents' house that day with my car, but without any illusions about my family's priorities. The drive home was filled with the stench of stale cigarettes and the bitter taste of betrayal. I made a silent promise to myself that Tyler would never touch my car again, no matter what sob story he came up with or how much pressure my parents applied. Looking back now, I realized that confrontation was just the opening act. Tyler had tested my boundaries and found them weaker than he'd expected. My parents had shown him that they would support his behavior no matter how unreasonable it became, and I had demonstrated that despite my anger and hurt feelings, I would ultimately back down when faced with family pressure. All the pieces were in place for something much worse to come. 2 months passed in relative peace after the car incident. Tyler seemed to have gotten the message about boundaries, and my parents stopped making comments about sharing and family obligations. I threw myself into work, earning a promotion to senior account manager, and a salary increase that finally made my Mustang payments feel comfortable instead of stressful. Life was good, and I almost convinced myself that my family had learned to respect my property and decisions. That illusion shattered on a Wednesday morning in November when I was preparing for a 5-day business trip to Seattle. Our agency had landed a major client in the Pacific Northwest, and I was leading the team that would present our campaign strategy. This was the biggest opportunity of my career, and I'd spent weeks preparing every detail of our presentation. The night before my flight, I parked the Mustang in my apartment complex's garage and made arrangements with my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, to keep an eye on things while I was gone. She was a retired teacher who spent most of her time tending to her garden and watching for any suspicious activity in our building. I gave her my contact information and asked her to call if she noticed anything unusual. Seattle was amazing. Our presentation went perfectly. The client loved our ideas, and by Thursday afternoon we'd secured a contract worth over $2 million to our agency. I was riding high on professional success and looking forward to celebrating with my team when my phone rang during our victory dinner. "Celeste, this is Mrs. Chen. I'm sorry to bother you, but I thought you should know that someone took your car from the garage this morning around 6:30. The restaurant noise faded into background static as my brain struggled to process what she'd just said. "Someone took my car? Are you sure it was mine?" "The red Mustang, yes." A young man with dark hair, maybe mid-20s. He had keys and seemed to know what he was doing, so I assumed you'd given him permission. But when I saw him again this afternoon, something felt wrong about the whole situation. My hands were shaking as I excused myself from the dinner table and found a quiet corner to continue the conversation. Mrs. Chen described the person she'd seen, and every detail matched Tyler perfectly. Height, build, hair color, even the way he walked with that cocky swagger he'd developed as a teenager. I immediately called Tyler, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Then I called my parents' house, and my mother answered on the second ring with a tone that told me she knew exactly why I was calling. "Oh, hi, honey. How's Seattle? Tyler mentioned you let him borrow the car while you were out of town." "Mom, I absolutely did not let Tyler borrow my car. He took it without permission. That's called stealing." "Don't be so dramatic, Celeste. Tyler had an emergency situation and knew you'd want to help if you were here. He's being very responsible with it." The gaslighting was immediate and shameless. My mother was trying to rewrite reality in real time, turning theft into a favor and making me sound unreasonable for being upset that someone had stolen my car while I was 3 states away. "What kind of emergency requires stealing someone's car, Mom? His friend Marcus needed help moving some furniture, and Tyler's car is still having problems. You know how expensive car repairs are these days. He figured you wouldn't mind since you weren't using it anyway." The casual way she dismissed my property rights was breathtaking. In her mind, my car wasn't really mine when I wasn't actively driving it. It was just family property that Tyler could access whenever he decided he needed it more than I did. I spent the next hour on the phone trying to reach Tyler, calling every number I had for him, and even reaching out to mutual friends who might know where he was. Nothing. It was like he'd vanished into thin air, taking my car with him. The final day of our Seattle trip was ruined. While my colleagues celebrated our success, I was consumed with anxiety about my stolen car and the betrayal of my family. I couldn't focus on anything except getting home and dealing with this nightmare. But Tyler wasn't done escalating the situation. When I finally reached him Friday evening, his attitude was completely different from the apologetic tone he'd used after the first incident. "Look, Celeste, I needed the car and you weren't around to ask. I figured you'd be cool with it since we're family and all. Tyler, you stole my car. You took it without permission while I was out of town. How is that being family?" "Stole is a pretty strong word. I borrowed it, and honestly, I'm doing you a favor by keeping it running while you're gone. Cars need to be driven regularly or the battery dies and the engine gets gummed up." The audacity was stunning. He'd transformed theft into a favor, criminal behavior into automotive maintenance. But what came next pushed the situation into territory I never could have imagined. "Besides," Tyler continued, "I've been thinking about this whole car situation, and I think it's time we worked out a more permanent arrangement." "What do you mean, permanent arrangement?" "I mean, you live in the city where you don't really need a car, and I'm out here in the suburbs where public transportation sucks. It makes more sense for me to have regular access to it." I hung up on him before I said something that would permanently damage our relationship, not knowing that Tyler had already crossed that line himself. I changed my flight to leave Seattle early, spending $800 of my own money to get home 2 days ahead of schedule. The flight home was the longest 5 hours of my life. I kept imagining worst-case scenarios. Tyler crashing my car, getting arrested for reckless driving, or simply deciding he liked it too much to give it back. By the time I landed at LAX, I was emotionally and physically exhausted from the stress. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood as I took an Uber from the airport directly to my parents' house. I'd spent the entire flight home rehearsing what I would say, how I would handle the situation calmly and rationally despite feeling like my family had completely betrayed my trust. I was prepared for arguments, excuses, and guilt trips, but I wasn't prepared for what actually happened. When I walked through the front door, Tyler was sitting at the kitchen table eating cereal like it was any other weekend morning. My parents were there too, drinking coffee and reading the newspaper as if nothing unusual had happened. The casual normalcy of the scene was almost more infuriating than outright hostility would have been. "Good morning, sweetie," Mom said without looking up from her paper. "You're home early. How was Seattle? Where are my car keys, Tyler?" He looked up from his cereal bowl with that expression he'd perfected as a child when he was about to lie to our parents about breaking something. But instead of the sheepish apology I expected, he leaned back in his chair with a smile that chilled me to the bone. "About that, Celeste, we need to have a family meeting about this whole car situation." "There's no situation to discuss. You stole my car, and I want it back right now." Dad finally looked up from his newspaper with a sigh that suggested I was being unreasonably difficult about something trivial. "Celeste, sit down. Let's talk about this like adults." "I am talking like an adult. Adults don't steal other people's cars." "Nobody stole anything," Mom interjected. "Tyler needed transportation, and you have more resources than he does. We think it's time for you to share some of your good fortune with your brother." The word share hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't about borrowing or emergencies anymore. My parents were suggesting that my car, which I'd bought with my own money and continued to pay for with my own income, should somehow become community property because Tyler wanted it. "I'm not sharing my car, Mom. It's not a toy or a family heirloom. It's my personal property that I work every day to afford." Tyler set down his spoon and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen from him before. It was cold, calculating, and completely devoid of the brotherly affection I'd grown up believing was real. "Here's the thing, Celeste. I've been talking to Mom and Dad about this, and we all agree that you've gotten a little too attached to material things since you moved out. This car has become like an idol to you, and it's affecting your relationships with your family. My attachment to my own property is affecting my relationships." "Yes," Dad said firmly. "You've become selfish and possessive. When Tyler was growing up, you shared your toys with him. Now that you're adults, you should be able to share your resources." The comparison between childhood toys and a $30,000 vehicle was so absurd that I almost laughed, but the serious expressions on their faces told me they weren't joking. They genuinely believed that my refusal to let Tyler use my car whenever he wanted was a character flaw that needed correction. "Besides," Tyler continued, "I've been doing research, and it turns out that siblings who share resources have stronger family bonds and better long-term relationships. I found this whole article about it online." "You found an article justifying stealing my car?" "I didn't steal anything. I took something that belongs to our family and used it for family purposes." That sentence hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Tyler had just declared that my car belonged to our family, not to me personally. The implications of that statement were so far-reaching that I felt dizzy trying to process them. "Tyler, I bought that car with my own money. My name is on the title, the registration, and the insurance. It belongs to me, not to the family." "Technically maybe," Mom said, "but morally we think you have an obligation to share your blessings with people who haven't been as fortunate." "People who haven't been as fortunate, or people who haven't worked as hard?" The question created an uncomfortable silence that stretched for nearly a minute. Finally, Tyler broke it with the words that would change everything between us forever. "Look, Celeste, here's the bottom line. Mom and Dad agree with me that this car situation has gone on long enough. We've decided that from now on I'm going to have regular access to it. You can still drive it sometimes when I don't need it, but the primary responsibility for it is going to shift to me." "The primary responsibility, yeah. I'm going to take over the insurance payments and maintenance and all that stuff. It'll be better for everyone because you won't have to worry about those expenses anymore. And I'll have reliable transportation to build my career." I looked around the table at the three people who were supposed to love and support me more than anyone else in the world, and I realized they'd had this entire conversation without me. They'd made decisions about my property, my finances, and my life while I was 3 states away working to build the career that paid for everything they were trying to take from me. "So you're just going to take my car and start making the payments on it?" "We prefer to think of it as redistributing family resources more equitably," Dad said. Tyler's smile widened as he delivered the final blow. "Face it, Celeste. My brother owns it now." The phrase hit me like a slap across the face. Not "I own it now" or "we're sharing it now," but "my brother owns it now," as if I was just some outside observer watching my own life be redistributed for other people's benefit. I stood up from the table and walked toward the door, not trusting myself to speak without saying something that would destroy what was left of our family relationships. But Tyler's voice followed me. "Don't be dramatic about this, Celeste. You'll thank us later when you realize how much stress we've taken off your shoulders." I left my parents' house that morning without my car keys, without any resolution, and without any illusions about who my family really was when their interests conflicted with mine. The walk to the nearest bus stop gave me time to think clearly for the first time in days, and by the time I reached my apartment, I knew exactly what I had to do. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold, and I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since this nightmare began. I'd spent Saturday night researching my legal options, making phone calls, and preparing for what I knew would be the most difficult decision of my life. But Tyler's smirk and those words, "My brother owns it now," had crystallized something important for me. This wasn't about a car anymore. This was about whether I was going to let my family steal my independence and self-respect along with my property. My first stop was the Riverside Police Department, where I walked into the lobby at exactly 9:01 a.m. carrying a manila folder stuffed with documentation. The desk sergeant, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, looked up as I approached. "I need to report a stolen vehicle," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "When did you discover it was missing?" "Wednesday morning, but I was out of town and couldn't file the report until now." She handed me a clipboard with forms to fill out, and I spent the next 20 minutes providing every detail I could remember about the theft. Make, model, year, color, license plate number, VIN, and most importantly, the identity of the person who took it. When I handed back the completed forms, the sergeant's eyebrows rose slightly as she read through my report. "Ma'am, it says here that your brother took the vehicle. Are you sure you want to file this as a theft rather than a family dispute?" "I'm absolutely certain. Tyler took my car without permission while I was out of state. The fact that we're related doesn't give him the right to steal my property." "I have to ask, did you ever give him permission to use the vehicle in the past?" "Yes, once, for what he claimed was a job interview. But this time he took it without asking while I was 3,000 miles away, and when I confronted him about it, he and my parents told me that he's keeping it permanently." The sergeant's expression shifted from skeptical to concerned as she processed the implications of what I was telling her. "They said he's keeping it permanently?" His exact words were, "My brother owns it now. My parents supported this decision and said they think I should share my resources with him." What happened next surprised me with its efficiency and professionalism. Within 30 minutes, I was sitting across from Detective Maria Santos, who specialized in property crimes and domestic disputes. She was a woman in her 40s with graying hair and the tired eyes of someone who'd seen every variation of human selfishness and stupidity. "Miss Rodriguez, I've reviewed your report and the documentation you've provided. You clearly own this vehicle, and what your brother did legally constitutes grand theft auto since the car's value exceeds $5,000. However, I want to make sure you understand the potential consequences of pursuing this case." "What kind of consequences?" "Grand theft auto is a felony in California. If convicted, your brother could face up to 3 years in state prison and fines up to $10,000. This will also create a permanent criminal record that could affect his employment opportunities for the rest of his life." The weight of those words settled over me like a heavy blanket. 3 years in prison seemed like an enormous punishment for stealing a car, even if that car represented years of my life's work. But then I remembered Tyler's arrogant smile and the way my parents had dismissed my property rights like they were meaningless suggestions. "Detective Santos, if Tyler had stolen a car from a stranger, what would happen to him?" "He'd be arrested, charged, and prosecuted to the full extent of the law." "Then why should it be different because he stole it from his sister?" She nodded slowly, and I could see respect growing in her eyes. "You're absolutely right. Family relationships don't create exemptions from property laws. If you want to proceed with this case, we'll treat it like any other theft." "I want to proceed. There's one more thing you should know. If your parents were aware of the theft and helped conceal it, they could also face charges for accessory after the fact and receiving stolen property." That possibility hadn't occurred to me, but as Detective Santos explained the law, it became clear that my parents' role in this situation went far beyond passive enablement. They'd actively participated in keeping my stolen car away from me, and had tried to legitimize Tyler's theft by reframing it as family resource sharing. "I want to pursue charges against all of them," I said, and meant it. The next few hours passed in a blur of legal paperwork, sworn statements, and procedural explanations. Detective Santos was thorough and professional, treating my case with the same seriousness she would have given to any other grand theft. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, warrants had been issued for Tyler's arrest and search warrants had been approved for my parents' property. "Miss Rodriguez will execute these warrants tomorrow morning. I want you to know that once this process starts, it becomes very difficult to stop. Are you absolutely certain this is how you want to handle this situation?" I thought about Tyler's smirk, my parents' dismissal of my property rights, and that phrase that had haunted me for 2 days, "My brother owns it now, I'm certain." Detective Santos walked me to the parking lot where a uniformed officer was waiting to drive me home. As we pulled away from the police station, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this whole ordeal began, a sense of control over my own life. The officer, a young man named Rodriguez who shared my last name but no relation, tried to make conversation during the drive. "If you don't mind me asking, ma'am, was this a hard decision to make?" "It was the easiest decision I've made in months," I replied, and realized I meant it completely. Monday morning arrived with the sound of my phone ringing at 6:15 a.m. I'd been awake for hours, unable to sleep as I anticipated what was about to happen, so I answered on the first ring. "Miss Rodriguez, this is Detective Santos. We executed the warrants about 20 minutes ago. Your brother is in custody and we've recovered your vehicle. It's currently being processed as evidence, but you should be able to retrieve it later today." "How did it go?" Your brother was surprised. He kept insisting that this was all a misunderstanding and that you'd given him permission to take the car. "Your parents were present during the arrest and they're requesting your phone number so they can call and discuss the situation." "I don't want to speak with them right now." "That's your right. However, I should warn you that this situation is about to become very public. Arrests are part of the public record and word tends to spread quickly in smaller communities." She was right about that. About 10 a.m., my phone was ringing constantly with calls from relatives, family friends, and neighbors who'd heard about Tyler's arrest. The story had apparently spread through our extended family network with the speed and accuracy of a game of telephone, meaning that half the people calling had completely wrong information about what had actually happened. My Aunt Carmen called to ask if it was true that I'd had Tyler arrested for borrowing my car. My cousin Miguel wanted to know if Tyler had crashed the car, and I was trying to get insurance money. My grandmother, who lived in a nursing home and rarely called anyone, somehow got hold of my number to ask if I was in some kind of trouble with the police. Each conversation was more exhausting than the last, because I found myself having to explain over and over again that Tyler hadn't borrowed my car, he'd stolen it, and that my decision to press charges wasn't about revenge or family drama, it was about property rights and personal boundaries. The most difficult call came from my mother at 2:30 in the afternoon. "Celeste, honey, you need to come down to the jail and straighten this whole mess out. Tyler is scared and confused, and he doesn't understand why you're doing this to him." "I'm not doing anything to him, Mom. Tyler did this to himself when he stole my car. He didn't steal anything, he's your brother, and brothers and sisters share things. This is all just a big misunderstanding that got out of hand." The gaslighting continued even with Tyler sitting in a jail cell, as if his arrest was somehow proof that the system was wrong rather than evidence that actions have consequences. "Mom, Tyler took my car without permission while I was out of state. When I confronted him about it, he told me he was keeping it permanently, and you and Dad supported that decision. How is that a misunderstanding? We were just trying to help him get on his feet. You have so much more than he does, and we thought you'd want to share your good fortune with your brother." "My good fortune, Mom, I work 60 hours a week to afford that car. Tyler sleeps until noon and plays video games. This isn't about fortune, it's about choices and consequences." The conversation devolved from there, with Mom crying and begging me to drop the charges, claiming that I was destroying our family over just a car. She couldn't or wouldn't understand that this had stopped being about a car the moment Tyler declared ownership of my property, and my parents supported his theft. Dad called an hour later with a different approach. Instead of emotional manipulation, he tried logical arguments about family loyalty and the long-term consequences of Tyler having a criminal record. "Celeste, I understand you're angry, but you need to think about Tyler's future. A felony conviction will follow him for the rest of his life. Is your car really worth destroying your brother's chances at building a career? Dad, Tyler destroyed his own chances when he decided to steal my car. I didn't make that choice for him. But you're making the choice to prosecute him, and that's going to have permanent consequences for our entire family. What about the permanent consequences of letting him think he can steal from me whenever he decides I have something he wants?" That question created a long silence, followed by Dad's frustrated admission that he didn't know how to make me see reason about this situation. The call ended with him saying that Tyler's bail hearing was scheduled for Wednesday, and the family was pooling money to get him out of jail. Tuesday brought a different kind of call, this one from Tyler himself, calling collect from the county jail. "Celeste, thank God you answered. Listen, I'm really sorry about this whole thing. I realize now that I should have asked before taking the car, and I understand why you're upset. But can we please work this out between us? I don't belong in here with actual criminals." His voice was small and frightened, completely different from the arrogant tone he'd used when declaring ownership of my car. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. until I remembered that this contrite act was the same one he'd been performing since childhood whenever his behavior finally had consequences. "Tyler, you are an actual criminal. You stole my car. I know, and I'm sorry. But pressing charges seems like such an extreme reaction. Can't you just drop this whole thing and let me make it up to you somehow?" "How would you make it up to me?" "I could pay for detailing to get the smoke smell out, and I could get that scratch fixed, and I promise I'll never touch your car again without asking first." The offer was pathetic in its inadequacy, but what struck me most was that Tyler still didn't understand the fundamental issue. He was apologizing for specific damage to my car, not for the theft itself, and his promise to ask before taking it implied that he still believed he had some right to use my property. "Tyler, this isn't about smoke smells or scratches. You stole my car and declared that you owned it. You and Mom and Dad decided that my property should be redistributed to you because you wanted it more than I deserved to keep it. We were just trying to work out a solution that would help everyone, a solution that helped everyone except the person who actually owned the car." The call ended with Tyler begging me to reconsider and promising to change his behavior if I would just give him one more chance. But I'd been giving him one more chance his entire life, and each time his behavior had gotten worse instead of better. Wednesday's bail hearing was a media circus in miniature, with local news reporters covering what they described as an unusual family dispute that had resulted in felony charges. I didn't attend the hearing, but Detective Santos called to let me know that Tyler had been released on $15,000 bail, money that my parents had apparently borrowed against their house to raise. "Miss Rodriguez, I want you to know that your brother's attorney is going to try to negotiate a plea agreement. They're hoping to get the charges reduced to a misdemeanor in exchange for restitution and community service. What do you think I should do? That's not my decision to make. But I will say this, in my 15 years working property crimes, I've never seen a case where the defendant showed less understanding of why their behavior was wrong. Your brother genuinely believes he was entitled to take your car because you're family. That evening my parents showed up at my apartment building, standing outside my door like they were planning to stage some kind of intervention. I could see them through the peephole, holding what looked like prepared statements and wearing the grim expressions of people about to deliver difficult news. I didn't answer the door. The weeks following Tyler's arrest were the strangest period of my adult life. Our extended family had essentially divided into camps, those who supported my decision to press charges, and those who believed I was destroying the family over a material possession. Holiday plans were canceled, family gatherings became awkward minefields of whispered conversations and pointed silences, and I found myself excluded from events I'd attended my entire life. My parents' campaign to get me to drop the charges intensified as Tyler's court date approached. They tried everything from emotional manipulation to financial incentives, offering to pay for the damage to my car, and even suggesting they could help with my monthly payments if I would just let this whole thing go. The most surreal moment came when my mother brought our parish priest, Father Martinez, to my apartment for what she called a reconciliation meeting. Father Martinez was a kind man in his 60s who'd known our family for over a decade, and he clearly felt uncomfortable being dragged into this situation. "Celeste, your mother is very worried about the division this situation is causing in your family," he began carefully. "She asked me to speak with you about the importance of forgiveness and family unity. Father, I appreciate you coming, but this isn't about forgiveness. Tyler stole my car, and when I confronted him about it, he and my parents told me that he was keeping it permanently. That's not a mistake or a moment of weakness. That's a deliberate decision to take something that doesn't belong to him. But he's your brother, and brothers and sisters sometimes make poor choices. Surely there's a way to handle this that doesn't involve the criminal justice system." I could see that Father Martinez meant well, but his suggestion that theft was just a poor choice revealed how completely my family had reframed this situation. They'd convinced everyone, including themselves, that Tyler's behavior was a minor family disagreement rather than a serious crime. "Father, if Tyler had stolen a car from someone in your congregation, what would you advise that person to do? That's different. That would be stealing from a stranger. How is it different? Why should family members have fewer property rights than strangers?" He didn't have a good answer for that question, and after an uncomfortable hour of circular conversations, he left with a promise to pray for healing in our family. My mother stayed behind to make one final plea. "Celeste, Tyler's attorney says that if he's convicted of a felony, He'll never be able to get a decent job or qualify for professional licenses. You'll be destroying his entire future over a car. Mom, Tyler destroyed his own future when he decided to steal from his sister. I didn't make that choice for him. But you're making the choice to prosecute him, and that's going to follow him forever. And if I don't prosecute him, what message does that send? That he can take anything he wants from me as long as you and Dad support his decision? She left that night in tears, and I didn't hear from either of my parents for the next 3 weeks. The silence was both a relief and a source of profound sadness. I'd never imagined that standing up for my property rights would cost me my relationship with my family, but their reaction had made it clear that they valued Tyler's convenience more than my autonomy. Meanwhile, my relationship with Tyler took an even stranger turn. He began calling me regularly from my parents' house, sometimes drunk and belligerent, sometimes crying and apologetic, but always with the same basic message. I was overreacting to a minor situation and destroying our family relationships over material possessions. Celeste, I've been thinking about this whole thing, and I realize that maybe I should have handled it differently, he said during one particularly lengthy call. But you have to understand that I was desperate. My car was broken, I had no money to fix it, and I saw your Mustang just sitting there in your garage while you were out of town. It seemed like such a waste. A waste? Yeah, like you weren't even using it, and I really needed transportation. It seemed logical to put it to good use instead of letting it sit there doing nothing. The entitlement in that statement was breathtaking. Tyler genuinely believed that my car became available for his use whenever I wasn't actively driving it, as if ownership was conditional on constant physical presence. Tyler, when you go to sleep at night, are other people allowed to use your bed because you're not actively using it? That's not the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. Just because I'm not using my property at a given moment doesn't mean it becomes available for other people to take. These conversations always ended the same way, with Tyler getting frustrated and hanging up on me, only to call back a few days later with a slightly different version of the same arguments. The legal process moved forward with bureaucratic efficiency. Tyler's attorney, a public defender named James Morrison, tried repeatedly to negotiate a plea agreement that would reduce the charges to a misdemeanor. Each time, Detective Santos called to ask if I would be willing to accept the reduced charges in exchange for restitution and community service. Each time I said no. Miss Rodriguez, I have to ask, what outcome are you hoping for in this case? I want Tyler to understand that stealing is wrong, regardless of who he steals from. I want my parents to understand that family relationships don't create exemptions from property rights. And I want everyone to understand that actions have consequences, even when those actions are committed against family members. Those are admirable goals. But the criminal justice system isn't really designed to teach life lessons. It's designed to punish crimes and protect society. Then let it do exactly that. 6 weeks after Tyler's arrest, his case finally went to trial. I'd expected a long, drawn-out legal battle, but the evidence was so overwhelming that the proceedings lasted only 2 days. Tyler's defense attorney tried to argue that this was a family dispute rather than a criminal matter, but the prosecutor, a sharp woman named Catherine Mills, systematically dismantled that argument. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the defendant wants you to believe that family relationships create special rules about property ownership. He wants you to believe that because he's related to the victim, he had some right to take her car without permission and declare permanent ownership of it. But the law is clear. Theft is theft, regardless of the relationship between the perpetrator and the victim. Tyler took the stand in his own defense, and his testimony was a disaster. Under cross-examination, he repeatedly contradicted himself, admitted that he'd taken the car without permission, and actually repeated his claim that he'd been doing me a favor by keeping the car active and maintained while I was out of town. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all charges. The months following Tyler's conviction were a study in how quickly family dynamics can shift when consequences become real instead of theoretical. Tyler was sentenced to 18 months in county jail and 3 years of probation, along with full restitution for my legal fees and the cost of recovering my car. My parents were charged with accessory after the fact and receiving stolen property, receiving suspended sentences and community service in exchange for guilty pleas. But the most dramatic change wasn't in the legal outcomes. It was in how my family suddenly began treating me with a respect I'd never experienced before. The first sign came 2 weeks after Tyler's sentencing, When my father called me at work to ask if we could meet for coffee, his voice was different from what I'd grown accustomed to over the previous months. Gone was the dismissive tone and the implied criticism of my choices. Instead, he sounded tired and genuinely remorseful. "Celeste, I owe you an apology that's about 6 months overdue. Your mother and I spent so much energy trying to protect Tyler from the consequences of his actions that we completely ignored how much damage he was doing to you and to our family. We met at a small cafe near my office, and for the first time in years, my father listened to me without interrupting or trying to redirect the conversation toward Tyler's needs and feelings. I keep thinking about that day when Tyler said he owned your car and how your mother and I just went along with it," Dad continued. "We told ourselves we were helping him become more independent, but really we were just enabling him to steal from his own sister. Dad, why did you think that was okay? Why did Tyler's wants matter more than my property rights?" He was quiet for a long time, stirring his coffee and staring out the window at the busy street beyond. "I think we got confused about what it means to love someone. We thought that loving Tyler meant protecting him from every difficult situation and making sure he always got what he wanted. We didn't realize that real love sometimes means letting people face the consequences of their choices, even when those consequences are painful. What about me? What kind of love was I getting when you told me to share my car with someone who'd already proven he couldn't be trusted with it? You weren't getting love, Celeste. You were getting taken for granted. We assumed you were strong enough to handle whatever we threw at you, so we kept throwing Tyler's problems in your direction and expecting you to solve them. That conversation was the beginning of a slow rebuilding process between my father and me. My mother took longer to come around, still convinced that I could have handled the situation with more compassion and understanding, but even she eventually acknowledged that Tyler's behavior had been unacceptable. The real transformation came from Tyler himself, though it took months of jail time for him to begin understanding what he'd actually done. His first letters from county jail were full of self-pity and resentment, blaming me for overreacting and destroying his life over a simple misunderstanding. But around month 6, something shifted. Maybe it was the reality of being surrounded by other people who'd made similar choices, or maybe it was the mandatory counseling sessions that helped him understand the difference between borrowing and stealing. Whatever the cause, Tyler's letters began to change. "Celeste, I've been thinking a lot about what happened, and I'm starting to understand how wrong I was. It's not just that I took your car without asking. It's that I convinced myself I had a right to take it, and then I convinced Mom and Dad to support my decision. I turned our parents into accessories to my crime because I was too selfish and entitled to respect your property." The apology continued for several pages, detailing specific incidents where Tyler had manipulated family dynamics to get what he wanted at my expense. It was the first time he'd ever acknowledged the pattern of behavior that had been building for years, long before the car incident. I realize now that when I said my brother owns it now, I was basically announcing that I didn't consider you a real person with real rights. I saw you as an obstacle to getting something I wanted, not as my sister who deserved respect and consideration. Reading those words was both vindication and heartbreak. Vindication, because Tyler was finally acknowledging what I'd been trying to explain for months. Heartbreak because it had taken a felony conviction and jail time for him to understand something that should have been obvious from the beginning. The most surprising change came from my extended family and community. The people who'd initially criticized me for destroying family unity began reaching out with apologies and admissions that they'd been wrong to pressure me into dropping the charges. My Aunt Carmen, who'd been one of the most vocal critics of my decision, called to tell me about a conversation she'd had with her own teenage son. "Celeste, Roberto came home last week and told me that one of his friends had taken his skateboard without asking. When I suggested he just let it go because they were friends, he looked at me and said, 'Mom, that's not what Cousin Celeste would do. She taught us that people don't have the right to take your stuff just because they want it.' I realized that you'd taught my son a lesson about self-respect that I'd been too blind to see. Similar stories came from cousins, family friends, and even neighbors who'd heard about the case. My decision to press charges had apparently become a talking point in conversations about boundaries, family dynamics, and the difference between enabling and supporting people you love. The legal restitution covered my direct costs, but the real restitution came in the form of changed relationships and mutual respect. Tyler served 11 months of his sentence and was released on good behavior, immediately finding work at a construction company that was willing to hire people with criminal records. When he was released, Tyler asked if he could take me to dinner to apologize in person. We met at a restaurant neither of us had been to before, neutral territory where we could have an honest conversation without the weight of family history pressing down on us. Celeste, I know that saying I'm sorry doesn't undo what I did or take back the months of stress and family drama I caused. But I want you to know that I understand now what I put you through, and I'm committed to making sure it never happens again. Tyler, I appreciate the apology, but I need to know that you understand why I couldn't just let this go. It wasn't about punishing you or teaching you a lesson. It was about establishing that my property rights and my boundaries are real and enforceable, even within our family. I do understand that now. And I understand that by stealing your car and then claiming I owned it, I was basically telling you that your work, your sacrifices, and your independence didn't matter as much as my convenience. We talked for 3 hours that night, covering not just the car incident but years of family dynamics that had led up to it. Tyler acknowledged that he'd been enabled by our parents' unwillingness to let him face consequences, and he expressed genuine remorse for the way he'd manipulated family loyalty to justify his behavior. I want you to know that I'm in therapy now, working on understanding why I felt entitled to take things that didn't belong to me. The counselor says it's related to never learning the difference between wants and needs, and never developing empathy for how my actions affected other people. That sounds like a good start, Tyler. But I want you to understand that rebuilding trust is going to take time, and it's going to require consistent behavior changes, not just apologies. I understand, and I want you to know that I'm not expecting forgiveness or for things to go back to the way they were. I'm just hoping that someday we can have a relationship based on mutual respect, instead of me taking advantage of your love for our family. Today, 3 years after Tyler's conviction, our family looks very different from what it was before. My parents still struggle with guilt over their role in enabling Tyler's behavior, but they've learned to treat both of their children as adults with equal rights and responsibilities. Tyler has maintained steady employment, paid back every dollar of the restitution, and hasn't asked to borrow anything from anyone in the family since his release from jail. Most importantly, I've learned that sometimes the people who should protect you the most are the ones you need protection from. And that's okay, because you are worth protecting, even if you have to do it yourself. Family love doesn't mean accepting abuse, theft, or manipulation. Real family love means holding each other accountable to standards of decency and respect. My Mustang is still sitting in my garage, still cherry red, still representing years of hard work and independence. But now it represents something else too. The knowledge that I'm strong enough to defend what matters to me, even when the people I love most are the ones trying to take it away. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their worst behaviors, even when that refusal comes with a high personal cost. Tyler needed to learn that actions have consequences. My parents needed to learn that love doesn't mean protecting people from those consequences. And I needed to learn that my boundaries and property rights are worth defending, regardless of who challenges them. The hardest lesson was discovering that standing up for myself would cost me the family relationships I'd always cherished. But the most important lesson was learning that relationships built on respect and mutual consideration are stronger and more meaningful than relationships built on one person's willingness to sacrifice everything for everyone else's comfort. If you've made it this far in my story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for yourself? Have you ever had family members or close friends who felt entitled to your resources, your time, or your possessions just because you cared about them? Drop a comment below and share your experiences, because I've learned that these situations are more common than most people want to admit. Hit that like button if this story resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories about setting boundaries and protecting your independence, even when it's hard. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that their property rights and personal boundaries matter, regardless of family pressure or guilt trips. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, you deserve relationships built on respect, not relationships that require you to sacrifice your dignity for other people's comfort. Until next time, take care of yourselves and protect what you've worked so hard to build.